Hey guys, Jacob Harper back again with a new episode of Talking Terror. On today's episode, I am talking with writer, director, and editor Kyle Edward Ball. Some of y'all may know Kyle from his hit horror film Skinamarink, which has been making waves in the horror community this year. It had a limited theatrical release back in January, and I managed to catch a screening, and I absolutely fell in love with it. And I knew I wanted to interview him, so I'm so thrilled that I am finally here doing this. And it's a great episode. We go all into the production of the movie, the reception of the movie, theories, the box office, production tips for other indie filmmakers. It's a great interview, and I'm super thankful for just the opportunity. So great stuff ahead. Y'all are really gonna enjoy this episode. But first, I want to give a quick shout out to Fangoria. As some of y'all may know, I am a Fangoria affiliate. And I want to go ahead and offer y'all a discount code for 20% off a subscription, a one time subscription, or an order. If you are already subscribed to Fangoria, you could use my 20% off code jacobtheharper, all caps, no space, to get yourself a cool shirt, a cool piece of swag, maybe a cool hat like mine. Or if you're not subscribed to Fangoria, which what are you doing? Subscribe to Fangoria right now using my discount code jacobtheharper, all caps, no space, and get yourself one of the best horror magazines on the market. I mean, truly, guys, some of the best people in the industry are talking with Fangoria, working with Fangoria. I mean, some of the best writers, some of the most diverse voices, some of the most well read, awesome people over there at Fangoria, and I couldn't be happier to be an affiliate with them. So definitely use that discount code. Helps me out, helps you out. Sounds like a good deal. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into the episode.
Recording in progress.
Yes, sir. Hey, everyone, this is Jacob Harper with Talking Terror, and today I'm joined by the infamous writer, director, and editor of the hit horror film Skinamarink, Kyle Edward Ball. Thank you for joining me.
I
So, just getting into it, I'm as a filmmaker myself, I'm very, very intrigued on the actual production aspect of the film. Um, as with a lot of indie horror films, the film took only around 7 days to film. That I read, is that correct?
7 days, 8 days if you count the camera test.
Okay, so yeah, around 7 to 8 days, all on a budget of $15,000. So I guess to start, what was an average day on set like?
So there were, of the 7 days, there were only 2 days that we actually had actors on set. So the first day we had Lucas, who plays Kevin, Dolly, who plays Kaylee, and Ross, who plays their father. And that entire day was us just getting their footage and getting their audio, right? So we shot everything first, or no, we shot the kids stuff first, which took about, I don't know, 3 to 4 hours. The kids were great, took direction really well, and we tried to make it as kid friendly as possible. And then we set up, after we wrapped their camera, we set up microphones in the living room. We got lunch, and then we did all the kids' dialogue. So I would basically give the kids a line reading, and they would repeat it back to me until they got it right. There was a handful of times where we couldn't quite get it. So originally in the script, there was a part where Kevin was supposed to hum "You Are My Sunshine," and Lucas didn't know the words, right? So we had to scrap that. And there was a handful of parts like that. And then we wrapped on the kids. So Dolly left. Lucas stayed because his dad is Ross. And then we shot Ross's camera and we did Ross's ADR. And so then we wrapped on the actors basically on time on the first day. Then days 2 to 3, we shot the other stuff. So basically, any scene that doesn't have a person in it, that's when we shot it. Then on the fourth day, we shot Jamie Hill, who plays the mother, and her camera and her dialogue took about, I don't know, 2.5 hours, 2.5 to 3 hours. Then we got lunch. Then we filmed more of the stuff that didn't involve the actors. Then day five, six, and seven, we filmed more of the house. Then we were wrapped. And the final shot we filmed was the infamous 572 days shot of the messy hallway. And then after we wrapped on that, I had a shot of vodka and gave a speech to the crew. So Jamie McCrae, who was our DOP, and Joshua Buckhalter, who was our assistant director. And I gave them a little director speech and we wrapped on the house and that was it. And then I spent 4 to 5 really stressful, depressing months in the dead of winter, autumn and winter in Edmonton editing the movie, and the rest is history.
Nice. Well, I mean, it's definitely an interesting like structure on like shooting the movie because that I mean this is one of the most unique films I've ever seen, so it's no shock that the production was very like unique and like kind of like you don't really hear stuff like that with movies. It was like wrapping basically all the actors in a day is like super impressive and super cool.
Thank you. And it was that wasn't an
Hello, I think I lost you on that.
we don't take too much out of the kid's life. And if we can't get professional actors, it would be something easy to do with kids who aren't necessarily used to being in front of a camera. And I kind of went in with that mindset. And if you plan everything out and go into it with a smart mindset as a first feature or first project, if you just plan and think things through and think things methodically, and also think things of, as far as, okay, I have a limited budget, I have limited resources, what's a way I can use those but still make a splash, right? And
Right.
even again, when I was just before even writing it, I had that in my mind. And if you have that in your mind and really think with that mindset, it can pay off.
Absolutely, absolutely. And like I mean I definitely agree with you on like making the best of like your resources and your budget. And someone actually asked me when I put out like a tweet saying, "Oh, I'm interviewing Director Skinamarink, ask your questions." Someone asked about like do you have like a budget breakdown?
Yeah, I can give more or less a budget breakdown. Um, so first off, the assistant director and the director of photography, they, as far as crew members, like on-set crew members, did a ton of work, right? So on top of working 7 days straight, not grueling necessarily days, like they weren't like 10, 12 hour, 14-hour shoots. I think the max we went on any given day was 9 hours.
Hmm.
Um, and they also did work beforehand, as far as Zoom meetings, getting everything ready. They were paid $2,000 Canadian each. The actors were all paid $150. So 150 for Dolly, 150 for Lucas, 150 for Jamie Hill, 150 for Ross. They were also paid, for example, Ross had to drive from Red Deer, which is about an hour and a half drive. So he was paid for his gas and time in that regard. Also, everyone got free McDonald's. And then I invested $1,000 into getting finally a laptop that I would be able to edit the film on competently. So this laptop right here. Um, and then something like $1,000 went to set deck. And then other money went into just odds and ends. And then, really, as far as cash, we only spent, I think, about $10,000 Canadian. And then the remaining like 5,000, 4,000 or so Canadian was in kind. So, for example, my executive producer Edmund Rotea had donated hard drives to the production, set deck and props to the production. So that was all done in kind. And then just another thing that doesn't show up in the budget, but is very important, is the director of photography, Jamie McCrae, works at the local film and video co-op, which has tons of great equipment and had years and years of free rental credit accrued. So we were able to use a high-end camera with airy lenses, high-end tripod, high-end audio equipment, all for $0, essentially because Jamie McCrae was nice enough to donate his years of unused rental credit to the production. So in reality, if we had put a dollar amount on that, that would have been gee, I don't know, like 30,000, 40,000, right? But again,
Mhm.
we that's what you do when you do an indie production. You find places where you can maybe get equipment for free and call in some favors. Also, Joshua Bookhalter had used all his audio equipment for the ADR, so that probably would have been another thousand, right? And then so there's lots of money that was essentially done in kind because a big thing with being an up and coming filmmaker is don't burn any bridges, right? Try to be nice, be good to your friends who are also filmmakers, because when it comes to your production, time to do your production, they'll be willing to donate time and equipment, right? So it really doesn't
Mhm.
cost any money being a nice person. And also going forward, because we had crowdfunded the budget, when my friends want me to come to their thing or help with their project, I'm more than willing to do it. So, for example, someone who had donated $25, I think, to the crowd fund, Kaylin Moore, she needed extras for her 1 day shoot a couple weeks ago, and I said, she donated to my crowd fund. I'm going to be a free extra, right? So I was an extra in her production. I think I even wore this shirt. Other things too, like I filmed in my parents' house, so they donated the location fee, right? Like they didn't charge for a location fee, stuff like that. So yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's good lessons to take, for indie filmmakers. Like you said, using your resources, definitely not burning any bridges, and
Yeah,
returning favors.
don't take people for granted, right? Like you
Yeah.
can't just keep doing productions for free, right? You can't don't take people's time and then not quid pro quo when they're shooting something, right? You have to pay them back with something, right? So obviously use the resources that are available, but don't disabuse people's kindness, right? So
Hmm. Absolutely. And it's funny you were talking about shooting with the kids, the child actor that plays Kevin. You said he was supposed to do a scene where he's saying, "You are
he
my
was humming
sunshine."
"You Are My Sunshine,"
Hmm.
and I just assumed everyone knew that, but he's like, I don't know the words. So we were
Right.
trying to coach him to sing it, and he didn't know the tune, and he was getting anxious, and I'm like, okay, we'll cut this scene, right? You
Right.
don't have to do it, right? So yeah.
Well, it's interesting because like that is a direct kind of take from the film's predecessor,
Heck
Heck.
yeah.
Yes, which I rewatched Heck like twice in preparation for this interview, which I guess I love Heck. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Great little short. If anyone hasn't seen it, check it out. But that brings me to my next question, which you know, what made you take the step from the short film Heck to the feature film Skinamarink? And why specifically did you adapt Heck into a feature, or was the idea always intended to be stretched out for a feature? Like, what was kind of the thought process and physical process of going from those?
Yeah, so for Heck, from the get-go, it was always designed to be a proof of concept for a feature of sorts.
Hmm.
So with Heck, I made a film where you never even see the kid, you only hear the voice. And when I was writing Heck, I said, okay, this can't just be a short film that is just used as a proof of concept. I want to create a story that's different for Heck, themes that are different for Heck than Skinamarink. And there's obviously some overlap, but I want to make something that if I never do a feature will stand alone as a short film that I can be proud of just by its own merits, and a feature that if you had no context for Heck could stand on its own merits, but will
Right.
also help be a proof of concept, and also will help prove to myself that I can do it and also be a stepping stone, right? So for years I did short films on YouTube and it's like, okay, well, let's do something a bit more ambitious.
Hmm.
So we'll do a kind of larger scope short film. And from there, if I know I can do that, then I can do a feature on a modest budget. And that's what I did, right? So it's good as a filmmaker to kind of take your time and do things in steps, right?
Hmm.
You can't necessarily jump out of film school doing a feature on day one, right? You got to take your time. And I think a big thing was find yourself and find your voice coming out of film school, because coming out of film school, I don't think my voice was ready. I didn't know who I was necessarily as a filmmaker, even though I knew what I liked. I didn't know what my voice was, and I had to find that over years.
Absolutely. And I think that really worked to your benefit. Because when I heard about Skinamarink, just through word of mouth, and I heard about your channel, Bite-Sized Nightmares, I started watching and I was like, oh my God, this is a genius concept. Like the business model of, taking people's submitted nightmares and trying to adapt them into, little micro shorts. That is an insane business model that I just absolutely fell in love with. And I think it's great practice. Like, I even was like, oh my, I need to try that. That's super
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. And I don't think I came up with the concept by any stretch. Like, I think there are other YouTube channels where people had described dreams, at least, or
Hmm.
maybe even nightmares, where they had recreated them. And when the channel's initial run, it never blew up by any stretch. Like, now when people go to the channel, there's 46,000 subscribers, I think. Before the movie came out, I think I had maybe 1,500, 1,500, right? So,
Hmm.
but even though my channel never went viral and blew up, I was still found the work rewarding, right? Like occasionally I would do a video and the person who had commented the dream said, "Oh my God, thank you so much. This is exactly how it felt," right? And so yeah.
Absolutely. And I do want to use that as sort of a segue into, it's like on your process on shooting stuff like that, because I always find your way of bringing dream logic, and I was talking to another guest on the podcast about the movie and he described it as nightmare logic, which I thought that was just a super cool term. So you have a way of bringing dream logic and turn nightmare logic to life, and I find that very interesting. So is there a process you have for writing and editing your work, and like how do you think, like what do you think allows you to convey this otherworldly feeling of like dreams and nightmares so accurately?
That's a tough one. Like a little bit, I think it was just experience of filming people's dreams.
Hmm.
Maybe it seeped into my sensibilities. And then when I was writing it, I said, okay, here's the story. Here are the beats, but when you're writing it, just try to uh, listen, right? Like, so imagine there's someone in another room far away who's feeding this to you, right? Like, kind of listen to the muse, listen to the ether. So when you get to writing certain parts, just let it flow like a dream, right? And the kind of infamous look under the bed scene, a lot of that in particular, and there's other parts in the movie where I did this too, but a lot of it, I just kind of let it flow, right? So the part where he says, look under the bed, that wasn't originally in my outline of the story. It just came out, right? Or even something more concrete, 572 days. I don't know where that number came from. It just was like, what's a number? 572, right? And
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of examples in the movie that I don't necessarily remember where it came from, but it just sort of flowed. And I'm writing my second movie right now, and I'm trying my best. And I think a lot of it does do this, where I'm kind of going back into that dream logic of just, okay, don't don't try to supersede it, just let it flow, let it happen like a dream, right? So yeah.
Absolutely. I mean that's a great answer. By the way, I know that was kind of a loaded question, but I just as I was writing these notes, I was like, I gotta know. But it's interesting that you bring up your second feature film. It's a feature, correct? That you're okay. Cool. I'll make sure I got that correct. Your second film, because one of the questions I got was to ask about that was I seriously doubt you could give any information on it, but I'm relieved
I
to
can
hear.
give just little bits and pieces. So
Mhm.
um so I've always found, whenever I tell people a little bit too much about an idea, kind of loses its magic, right? And this
Right.
has been ever since I was a little kid, right? Like I would start writing little short horror stories and my mom would read them. And then I don't want to write it anymore, right? So I'm keeping everything in here. There are a handful of people where I've told the working title and little bits and pieces, like my manager and a few production companies know the working title, and they've been told to be tight-lipped about it. But all I can tell you is it's a feature, it's horror, and it's going to be mimicking a look similar to the way Skinamarink mimicked a certain era and a certain look. This will also do that. And that's all and it's also very Kyle and very personal. And that's all I can say at this point.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm appreciative you even gave me that. I went into this question expecting nothing, so that's awesome. Because what the person was asking was like, if the film was going to be still in the Skinamarink style, or if you were going to try to do something, I guess more. I think they described it as more mainstream, which I'm thankful
Well,
that you're still doing.
I think this might be a little bit more mainstream, but not by leaps and bounds. So
Not by
I
like
still,
mainstream expectations, I guess.
yeah, like it might be a tiny bit, but not by a lot, right? Like I still want to make stuff that's weird, and
Hmm.
I find it's getting the audience to not even meet me halfway, but pull them in. I've found been very rewarding, and it has certainly worked for me up until this point. So why would I get in the way of that? Why would I try to make something a lot more mainstream? Because then if I make something more mainstream, then I'm not making my movie, and I'm not necessarily, I think, making something that people will be excited to see. Skinamarink blew up because it wasn't mainstream, right?
Hmm.
So
Absolutely.
yeah.
I'm relieved to hear that it's still in the same style, like I like at least kind of style of Skinamarink. I'm not sure what you have planned, but I'm excited nonetheless. And that
I'm not
brings up
even
maybe
100% sure either. Like it changes, right? Like it's similar, but once I start writing it, things change. And then maybe when we get to pre-production, it's like, what if we did this? What if we did that? So we'll see, right?
I mean, that's how you know it's going to be good when you're still surprising yourself up until
Yeah.
like the production. That's
That's the fun
exciting.
thing about writing it too, because a lot of times when you're writing it's right, and then you'll have these moments of be like, and it's almost like
Yeah.
coming from without, right? Like a
Hmm.
ghost whispering in your ear. And I've had that a lot with writing this one too, where a lot of times it's just coming from without, right? Because yeah,
Absolutely. It's like the big eureka moment whenever you're,
yeah.
planning an idea. I love those. Whenever I'm writing like a short or even like a proof of concept, I'm like, oh, there it is. And I
What
jump.
about this? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'll be about to go to bed and then I have to like bust out my laptop and spend an
Yeah,
hour
same. I
trying to
keep
write
like
something down.
notepads all around. And my
Yeah.
phone, there's a part that just says working title Muck and Meyer, and so yeah.
Well, you bring up the, how the style of Skinamarink has been, successful. And I'm again, congratulations on all the success for the movie. It's definitely well earned. This is one of the most unique films I've ever seen. And so I'm
Thank you.
curious, of course, I'm curious as because it was a very polarizing entry in the horror genre. I've heard people say, oh, it's not for me or it's whatever. And there's people like me who just can't stop talking about it. So I'm wondering, while it turned a good profit in theaters, 15K to I think the final number was 2.1 million, something like that.
Yeah, and growing because of foreign, right? And
Absolutely. If you have foreign and then I don't know how all the streaming stuff works or Blu-ray deals or whatever, but I assume there's some stuff on the back end there. Do you think the horror genre should expect more of this style or subgenre? And do you think audiences are ready for it?
oh yeah, absolutely, right? Like the fun thing about horror is compared to, I think, other movies, it really has to keep reinventing itself. And that's the fun thing about horror is that if you look at older horror movies, they're so dramatically different because they people get used to it so quickly and you have to keep changing it and be exciting. Sometimes it feels like making a horror movie, it's like filmmaking on expert mode. And I think there's things to be said too of, well, if you do a drama though, or you do a comedy, they certainly have their work cut up for them in that field too, right? But at least from my perspective, horror is always the most exciting thing. And it changes so much because people expectations change with it so much. And then another cool thing with horror is that people come back to old stuff, right? Like we're next year coming up on the 25th anniversary of the Blair Witch Project, which was copied a ton.
Hmm.
And then if you go back to the Blair Witch Project, there's things that original movie did that were not copied, right? There's that's such a wonderful thing about exploring horror is it feels like no matter what year you look at the movies, it's always the most exciting time, right? So yeah.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree that, horror, you could always go back and take a page from previous, lessons and how it never
Or
dies,
just
really.
as a movie goer, right?
No,
Like
absolutely.
you can like I watch old movies all the time, old horror movies all the time, and a lot of times they're a lot creepier than stuff that's being put out today.
Hmm.
So, I think we get bent out of shape about little things like overacting and framing and oh, that's not scary anymore. And really, if you just put all that aside and let it take over, you'll have fun, right? And I really hope I can discover more old horror movies that I haven't heard of that might creep me out or scare me, right?
Absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned Blair Witch Project because I'm writing an article on this right now. I'm essentially the premise of the article is that Skinamarink is this generation's Blair Witch.
Thank you.
which,
That's such a
of
huge
course,
honor to hear. And
absolutely.
I don't even know necessarily if it's, but a lot of people have drawn comparisons, and that means the
Hmm.
world to me as someone who obviously the Blair Witch Project has been a towering influence. And geez, Blair Witch Project, there's times where in horror it's like, well, before that it was Eraserhead, and before that it was Night of the Living Dead, right? So
Hmm.
that's the other thing about horror too, is it's so democratic, right? And where someone could who is working class could make a movie that could have a big splash, right? So
Absolutely. And I know from what I've read, a lot of Skinamarink's influences come from 1970s horror. I know you're a big fan
mhm.
of 70s horror, because you reference Black Christmas a lot. You say this is the Black Christmas shot in the in the
Yeah.
commentary I was watching. So it's I mean, it tracks what you're saying about, old horror and how it could still work, and people, whether you're a professional or whether you're just an average moviegoer, are still going back to that stuff and being excited about it. Which
Mhm.
I'm the same. I love, like my favorite horror film is probably the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, from
Yes.
'74. So that's like,
It's such it really is such a gorgeous film, right?
it is, right?
There's a lot of exploitation horror from that era that we don't necessarily remember for a reason. And then if you
Hmm.
watch the Texas Chainsaw, there's shots in it where it's geez, the DOP really should have got an Oscar nomination. And I'm not being ironic with that.
No,
Like that,
absolutely.
there's
It's art.
so much beauty in that, like objective beauty, right? Just the part where she gets off of the bench and walks towards the house, and we follow her in,
Yes.
and the dinner scene, and just the ending, haunting beauty of Leatherface at dusk throwing the chainsaw
Yeah,
around.
with the
That's
orange sun in the background and just him just
yeah.
going in and out of like the view of the sun. Oh my God. That movie is like high art. I mean, no one can change my mind on that. Let's see. And speaking of 70s, was just a personal question of mine. I've kind of always had this in the back of my head from when I first saw the trailer. At the end of the trailer, for a brief moment, a text reads "in theaters 1973" before quickly changing to 2023. What was the
Hmm.
significance of this when the movie takes place in the mid 90s? I'm very curious about that.
So originally the trailer. So first off, the reason the movie's set in the 90s is because it aligns with my age, right? So I would have been
Hmm.
4 years old in 1995, like the characters on screen. The reason that's the reason the movie is mimicked in the style of the 70s, even though it's set in the 90s, is more or less because I wanted to do it, right? So I'm aware movies from 1995 don't look like that, and I don't care. I did it anyways. And most people have responded to that. The other thing too, the 73 to 2023, originally in the trailer, the text was 72 to 2002. And then when Shutter acquired it and we were going to release in 2023, they just changed it based on that. And the reason I originally picked 1972 was very simple. It was the year before The Exorcist came out. So
Okay. All right.
that's really
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
I dig that. That's really cool. Um, and with the movie, there's, I mean, still a lot of theories, and I mean, I know you don't want to step on anyone's theories
But
as
we
we
can
talk
still
about them.
talk about it. Yeah.
Absolutely. My overall question was, there are a lot of theories and speculations on the plot, and is there any particular ones that you think are more accurate than others, or is there a specific story in
There
your head?
definitely there are definitely ones I hear where it's like, yeah, that is kind of what I thought.
Hmm.
I'm not gonna say what they are, but there are ones where it's like, damn, get out of my head. And there's other ones which have been so neat where people have theories and it's like, shit, I never thought of that. That's amazing. Shit. What maybe that is the story, right? You know, the beautiful thing that has been so humbling is that at some point I stopped writing the movie and stopped editing the movie. And then a beautiful thing happened where people kept writing the movie for me on message boards and on Reddit and on Twitter threads and in YouTube comments. People kept writing the movie for me,
Hmm.
you know?
No, yeah, absolutely. Every theory I see, I read, I absolutely see some validity to.
Yeah, and I saw someone commented because you had asked, what are some questions you want me to ask? Someone asked if it's a genie, a jinn, right?
Hmm.
And I think that's so obviously I won't say yes or no, but I think that's so neat too, because that's has a certain theological aspect to it, right? And there's certain things where theology and the concept of hell and divinity and stuff, all those things were swirling in my mind when I was writing it. And because I wasn't raised religiously, but it was still an influence because my mother certainly was.
Hmm.
And those ideas and concepts were very much in the back of my mind when writing it and crafting the idea and crafting the household and yeah, I thought that the gin thing was so neat. And again, I'm not going to say yes or no, but I think there's certain aspects of it where maybe there is, right? So
Hmm. No, absolutely. And that same person who asked about, the gin, they put out like they asked a bunch of really cool questions. And one that I didn't even think about was is if Skinamarink is a basically retelling of Hansel and Gretel, which when I
yeah,
read that
so
I
that
was like,
actually came back from when I was pitching it, and so that originally came from before any of this. I told my friend Edmund, the executive producer, just kind of the plot summary. And he
mm,
said, okay, so it's a Hansel and Gretel story. And I thought, yeah, it is. Two kids with no parents, and there's a monster, right?
yeah.
And then if you look at a lot of horror, a lot of ideas, a lot of mythology, it basically is that, right? So yeah, and then I think in a few interviews said that. And if you look at it, it really is a Hansel and Gretel story, a boy and a girl, and the parents have left them, and there's a monster who they have to
Absolutely.
deal with, right? So
Yeah, when I read that, I was like, that didn't even click for me. When I saw Hansel, I was like, that is a Hansel and Gretel story. That's awesome.
yeah.
That's really cool. Um, want up more questions. So, one question I have because I think the I'm just gonna call it the entity in Skinamarink
Mm.
because really it's it has really no name, and from what I've seen, I can't really find a name for it. People just describe it as the
Well,
entity.
and that's the cool thing too, is everyone has different names for it. Even before when I was sending rough cuts to our associate
Hmm.
producer John Kamech, he was the first person to dub it the Skinamarink. And I'm
Yeah,
like, it's not maybe it is. I don't know, right? So that's been here. The entity, the demon, the Skinamarink, the presence, the
the presence is
monster.
good. I
I
like
liked
the
I liked the
presence.
monster,
The
right? The
monster,
monster.
yeah.
Yeah.
I remember when the movie came out, I was calling it the Skinamarink. I just think that just sounds cool. But so what my question really is, what inspired the entity in Skinamarink? Because for a villain that could do so much but be seen so little, I'm curious what drew, like, what kind of formed that monster for you.
Yeah. Um, that's a tough one because I can't necessarily say something without it giving too much away.
Right.
As but I don't know if I can answer that, right? I really
If you can, no
yeah.
worries. Yeah. Well, I mean
Yeah.
that adds more intrigue. Now I'm gonna be up at night thinking about. Okay, so Skinamarink, it's been described pretty much as like an analog horror as a feature horror film. and I've read that you're very into analog horror and that style, and they're pretty big on YouTube and such. Um, so do you have any particular favorites or any specific ones that maybe inspired
The
Skinamarink
really
or even its
cool ones,
predecessor?
and the kind of fun thing about analog horror is any movie can be analog horror if it's on a videotape and it's been collecting dust for long enough, right?
Hmm.
So, in college, film school, my friends in film school got me turned on to Marble Hornets, and which, obviously has some flaws, but I don't think would work if it was perfect, right? And
Right.
too polished. And so a lot of it was Marble Hornets, this cool stuff with the Mandela catalog.
Yeah.
What's that channel? The Local 58? Yeah,
Local
that whole
58,
thing.
yes. I love Local 58. That's awesome.
And the ways it's been interpreted through other analog horror has been interpreted in creepy pastas and this and that. The
Hmm.
whole Candle Cove thing, which was adapted into a series for Shudder, right? And then analog horror is so. And again, though, it feels weird because when I was writing it and describing it and pitching it, I never used the term analog horror. I always called it lo-fi, right? So I was even
Right.
drawing more from lo-fi music like The Caretaker, right? So that was always my thing of, oh, lo-fi. And then when the movie came out, people described it as analog. And I knew about analog horror, but I never had looked into what people were calling it, right? So
Hmm.
yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, first, it's cool that you mentioned The Caretaker. That album is like haunting.
Oh my God. The
It's creepy.
Caretaker was such an influence. I was listening to it so much while writing and editing. I was listening to lots of stuff. Like a big thing was I was listening to old cartoons and old time radio.
Hmm.
I love old time. There's this so many old time radio programs. I've always found there's different ones. So there's ones where it's very stagey, right? So it'd be like, Jonathan, what's that? There's someone at the door. And they get so wordy in describing it. But there's these other old time radio programs where you can tell they were trying to avoid that and write something that was a bit more ethereal, right? Where someone wasn't necessarily just describing something, but it was almost an internal dialogue thing and coming back to a dream logic, right? So yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, and it's also funny you mentioned Marble
And if
Hornets.
you what's more analog horror than that? Old time radio, right?
Oh
Like those
yeah,
are literally tubes, right? So yeah.
that's dope. And it's funny you mentioned Marble Hornets. That's a name I haven't heard in a long time. I remember watching that in like middle school and early high school, and I was like, "Oh, that's
Yeah.
that's cool." And that was after the
Mhm.
series had already ended to become like a movie, and just that creepy pasta era where people were making
Mhm.
like basically fan pieces of creepy pastas and creepy pasta like internet stories. And it's cool to see how that's evolved to reach this point because I see a
Mhm.
lot of analog horror now with, like you said, Mandela Catalog, Local 58. But I never really thought of, Marble Hornets and such as analog horror, but it is.
It's kind of almost patient zero as far as internet analog horror, right?
Absolutely. That's yeah, I never even drawn that comparison, but that's interesting. So I'm looking at more comments here. Uh Someone asked, was it hard to edit? Was there a conscious decision to make long edits and create tension through pushing the viewer that may instead of the editing used in a conventional horror?
Yeah, like that was always a thing too of I wanted to really push how long a shot would hold. And even I always, when I was writing it and fantasizing about, oh, people describing the movie, I always had this thing in my mind of people would say, oh my God, you should see this movie. Like there's segments where it's like almost nothing is happening. It's so fucking weird, right? And a lot of that mentality came from my friend Shevlin. he was describing Silent Hill 2,
Hmm.
and he said you would play Silent Hill 2 and there'd be hours where you're just walking around doing nothing. There's no monsters, there's no this. You're just walking around, and after a while it just gets into your soul of, and it kind of breaks your heart and you start to feel alone, and then you have this part where you pull yourself out of it where it's like it's 2 a.m. I'm alone playing a video game, and it kind of depresses you and breaks your heart and creeps you out, right? And I
Hmm.
wanted that to be a little bit in the movie. Some of it's unintentional though too, because when I was sending rough cuts back and forth to my crew, no one's going to say, Kyle, this shot's too long, this shot's too this, by the shot, right? So a lot of it was just me kind of winging it and being like, okay, are they talking about, because people will give general, this movie needs to be trimmed, right? That was a common thing, but I
Hmm.
didn't know how much or for which shot, so I was going in blind when I was cutting down the rough cut, trying to figure it out. So some shots it was, yeah, that's intentional, and other shots it was just down to editing, in editing blind, right? And going by the seat of my pants and not having necessarily the input I wanted, going into post production.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned like trimming and the editing process. I heard some people say that it was either like too long or some shots were too long. But I personally, I liked your kind of comparison to Silent Hill 2 because on a previous guest on the podcast we talked about Silent Hill 2 a little bit and how it he mentioned Silent Hill is a rather easy game to play. It's just the atmosphere and the
Yeah, the
dread
feeling.
of stepping forward. It slows you down. Like
Yeah.
if you know everything that's going to happen and you stone face it, you could probably beat Silent Hill 2 pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But
Right.
the feeling of dread is what slows you down because you're inching towards corners, and I
And
think
I've
that reflected
noticed
a lot.
coming back to analog horror, I haven't played it, but I've seen so much talk about the 8-bit horror game. It's called Faith. Have you
I
heard
just
of?
Yeah, I just watched some gameplay of it the other day, and it was really cool.
It's so cool. Wendigon did a whole video on it, and it's just so cool. Just the aesthetic and feeling, and
Mm,
oh, Mortis, and oh, that was a cool thing too. And I'm pretty sure I heard about Faith before I started writing the movie, so maybe there's even a little bit of that in it. So yeah.
absolutely. Which I was binging some Wendigoon before this interview. I was watching some of his talk about Skinamarink to see if I could pick up any extra knowledge
The
or
Wendigoon
questions.
thing was so neat because I he was just off my radar. I didn't really quite know who he was. And
Hmm.
then he had DM'd me on Twitter and he's like, "Hey, do you mind if I do this video about Skinamarink?" And I'm like essentially like, "Yeah, kiddo, go nuts," right? Not knowing he was like this gargantuan YouTube channel. And
Right.
then he released the video, and I started getting messages from friends saying, like, did you see fucking Wendigoon did a video about and I'm like, oh yeah. And then I went back and found the original DM and I'm like, shit, maybe
Like, yeah,
this
I
is,
signed off on. I know about it.
yeah, right. Like, because sometimes you don't. And the fun thing too is after he did that video, I started watching his videos, and it's like, wow, you know what? This Wendigoon kid's quite good. I really like his stuff, right?
I've been watching more of his stuff lately because I've been subscribed to him for a while, but I've just been kind of binging him lately, and he
I
seems
know. I
super
went
cool.
through a whole like thing where I was just, sometimes you find a channel where it's like, this is gonna be my thing for a week. All my meals and so
Absolutely, yes. I've
yeah.
been through that a few times. Another kind of question I got from the tweet was they ask why a brother and sister and why these ages. I've heard him speak a little bit before
Oh,
on this and why this age range, but curious to hear more and why he wanted to evoke the fear of being left alone among these age ranges. And I think you kind of answered a little bit there
Yeah,
because you
yeah, really, it
said,
was just drawing from personal experience, right?
mm-hmm,
I figured, okay, this is my first time writing a feature, so let's try to make it easy as possible. So why not just make two characters that are based on you and your older sister?
right,
So, and then I thought back to the reason it was 4 years old was that was before kindergarten and before the world was kind of ruined for me, right? At 4 years old, everything was perfect. I didn't have kindergarten. I didn't, everything was just me, my mom, my dad, and my sister, and toys and this and that. Like, and like obviously it wasn't perfect, but it was just like it was before the world became so big and so terrifying, where the most terrifying thing was going to bed, right? And so
yeah,
that's why I picked the ages. And then that's why it was 1999, 1995. I would have been 4 years old in 1995. My sister would have been five, turning 6 years old in 1995. And that's why I picked them. And that even came down to the names where I'm like, okay, what are some name? I can't just name them Kyle and Candace. So Kevin and Kaylee. Right? Right.
yeah, no, yeah. Well, it's cool that you took because usually for like writers, they always say write what you know and take inspiration from
Yeah.
yourself. So
Which,
I like that.
like there's no rules to things. I think that's a good rule of thumb,
Hmm.
but you can't always write what you know because then every single movie would be about some schlub trying to write a script, right? So you have to find ways around that, right? And Scorsese, who was never in the mafia, he always found ways of making those ideas super personal. It's like, well, okay, well, really, it's a story about a guy who grew up in New York, and really it's this, and really it's that, right? I'm the movie I'm writing right now, on its face, the main character is almost to a T, just on paper, completely different than me. But really, they're me, right? Just right what there's so many, and again, it comes back to the beauty of humanity where we are really not that different, right? So
No, yeah, I think that's great writing advice and a good lesson from Martin Scorsese because you're right, he would never end the mafia, but he always finds a way to tell those stories in unique ways. I
yeah.
mean, he's done like 10 mob flicks and they're all super good, so he's doing
Yeah.
something right. Yeah, so I guess in that, um, and I don't know if you have to wrap up anytime,
We should
anytime.
probably wrap up soon. Yeah.
Yeah,
But if
yeah,
there were any questions you wanted to get out just while I'm here, yeah.
absolutely. Well, I think for now, one thing is like as an indie filmmaker yourself and with this huge, great success story in the genre, what advice do you have to indie filmmakers out there when whether it's getting their first feature done or second feature or whatever, just indie filmmakers?
There's so much advice I could give. A big thing I would say is be kind. There are so many asshole directors out there who just treat people like garbage. And growing up, I like, and there were exceptions, right? People like Ron Howard, people like Steven Spielberg are known for being nicer. But in the same vein, growing up, I saw so many horrible role models, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's been another thing too going forward is that I, by accident, without choosing it, became a role model for young filmmakers. And I'm always super conscious of that, right? So I would say be a nice person. All the role models or your idea of what a director is are kind of stereotypes and lies. And you'll find before you yell action and an actor is saying, wait, do you mean like this or like this? And you panic, don't think of, oh, how is a director supposed to do that? Just talk and be nice and try to be a human. And another thing I would say, and no one taught me this in film school, but I think this is really helpful advice. A lot of advice doesn't apply to you. A lot of advice is bad advice. Like a lot, like looking back at film school, some, not all, right? Like I did get good, wholesome advice from a lot of my instructors and a lot of people who talked to me in the industry, but a lot of people who gave me bad advice, like gave me the worst possible advice either. And looking back, it's like, you're basically a narcissist or you're basically just a shitty person and you gave me bad advice. Or sometimes let's strongman them. You gave me advice from maybe the documentary area, which is a completely different model. So in Canada, documentary is king, and a lot of advice. And here's the good thing too, our executive producer Ava Carvernan, she's in the documentary area, and she said three magical words a few times when I was asking for advice, which is, I don't know. And she would say, Kyle, I'm in the documentary world. Your thing doesn't apply to my area of expertise. Reach out to this person, reach out to that person, because I make documentaries, you make horror movies. Yeah. So take all advice, including mine, right? Because my advice is tainted beyond recognition, right? Like I had this enormous sweetheart surprise hit and went from being kind of obscure to this. So my perspective and ideas are tainted beyond recognition, right? Most filmmakers will unfortunately not have the wonderful Cinderella story that I have been privileged to have, right? So, yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's great advice. Because as someone who just
Yeah.
graduated film school back in May, I could definitely attest to what you're saying about.
Congratulations for graduating, by the
Oh,
way.
thank you, thank you. And yeah, I mean that's sound advice for any filmmaker, especially in the indie scene, because there's so many different directions and so many different paths, and there's no correct, like you said, there's no correct answer, and there's no rules
Yeah.
to anything. So all this
And
stuff where it's like, oh, here's what I did. It's like that may not apply, that may not
you
work in your
know,
direction.
And one big piece of kind of not advice, but philosophy, one of my instructors in film school said was, we're not making bumpers, right? Like this is art, this is that. To get from point A to point B is completely different for you versus someone else, right? That's kind of
Hmm.
the beauty and je ne sais quoi of art, right? So yeah.
Well, that's awesome, man. Well, thank you again.
And if
Uh,
another thing, if you do make a mistake and maybe are shooting something and yell or shout or blah blah blah, it's never too late to say I'm so sorry, right? It's never too late to
exactly.
apologize. Just in life in general, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I mean, sets can be stressful. I
yeah,
know
sets can be
director
stressful.
shorts.
We Jesus, and a lot of things too are people have this thing in their mind that, oh, movies, da da da. It is still just a workplace, and a lot of things how you would want to be treated just in a workplace in general, or how you would want to be treated on a film set, right?
Yeah,
So yeah,
absolutely. Because film is such an emotional thing. It's art, but like I
yeah,
said, it is also the workplace. So if you get stressed, if you get emotional, because I know I've gotten like annoyed or stressed out on sets, and afterwards I'm like, hey, sorry if I seemed pissy. It's
yeah,
just
yeah.
it's a stressful environment, and it's just
And
everyone
I will
is
tell
so
you
vulnerable.
too, when you're a indie filmmaker, if you're nice and can try to make sets easy and sets fun, people will always want to work with you more than, let's say, you have an Orson Welles level of talent but are a fucking asshole or a creep. Then a whisper network will form around you that you're going to find things get harder and harder, right? So
Absolutely,
and then you'll have
absolutely.
to live with yourself. So
Mhm. I've
Yeah.
definitely heard stories of that where it's like, oh, don't work with this guy. It's just he's talented, but oh
Oh
my
my
god,
God.
it's a pain in the
Every
ass
other
to get
thing.
on the set.
To this day, I always think like, how did Lars von Trier get to the level he is? Because, and that being said, Dancer in the Dark is one of my favorite films. I looked up to him growing up, but I didn't look up to the words around him and oh, he's a bad guy, right? Like, so yeah.
I've heard horror stories from some indie film sets, and I'm like, oh my god, because a lot of it is volunteer. A lot, it's either very minimum
Yeah,
money or volunteer. Like people are volunteering their time to be there, and if you're going to be a dick, that's
yeah, and
just not
then
going to
the
work.
thing with a lot of volunteering and a lot of, oh, he's a big deal, is there's a lot of taking advantage of people's free time and people's goodwill, right? So,
Hmm.
yeah,
Absolutely, absolutely.
look
Well,
out for each other.
very true. And again, it's art. We're all artists. We're all vulnerable. We're all in a vulnerable state when we're working on our art. So it's just like you said, kindness goes a long way on these
Yeah,
projects. Trying to see if there's any more questions here that weren't already addressed because a lot of them are about like theories and plot details,
yeah.
and
It's
I'm like, I
hard,
already know the
right?
answer to this.
And
I
it's
already
been this hard thing where I'm like, I can't answer this, but I don't want to just say, no, I'm not going to answer that. And I have to walk this fine line of,
yeah,
oh, that's interesting, or oh, and I like to say to people, you know, it's not my movie anymore. It's your movie. It doesn't matter what I think, right? So
yeah, which that goes back to one of the questions I had asked you previously, where it's like, is this was this made to be an open to interpretation?
absolutely,
And that from
absolutely.
everything I've seen, all signs point to yes.
From day one, I wanted something that people could make personal and make their own, right? And
Hmm.
I want to keep doing that
Absolutely,
without it
absolutely.
being cheap, right? Because there's so many times where it's like, you can tell the filmmaker wrote, I don't know what to write here. We'll just be vague and then people can draw their own conclusions, right? I was never vague to be lazy. Be vague on expert mode, right? Like,
Absolutely. And I think what works in Skinnamar's favor of being vague is that it's like the vagueness is it's the boiling point of everything involved in the film. You know, the unconventional cinematography, how the camera's always at a child's height, and whatever
yeah,
the subject of the focus is always just out of, plain view.
yeah.
And the Foley sound, the sound effects, the cinematography, the lighting, it's all accumulating into this feeling of dread. And so the vagueness is almost a cherry on top. I'm not like an afterthought. It was intentional, but
Mhm.
it works in its favor so well. Where other movies, you like you said, you could tell it was more an act of laziness or just, oh,
Also,
I don't want
sometimes
to explain it, so we're just gonna go with it.
condescension, right? Like the
Yeah.
audience, the audience has a brain. Don't talk down to them. They're not smarter than you, right?
Hmm.
Like, so
That's why I appreciated Skinamarink, because it was like it's challenging me. It's not like, oh, you're not gonna get it, so I'm not gonna explain it. But it's also not like,
yeah.
hey, you're not thinking, so let me explain it to you. It was a perfect, in my opinion at least, perfect balance of, okay, this is challenging me to think, but it's not a hard riddle where I'll never be able to solve it, or it's not fully explained to me point A to point B, which I really appreciate.
Thank you.
Course. I think that about covers it for questions. Thank you again for joining me.
For
It means a
sure.
lot. I love Skinamarink, guys. Everyone watching, check out Skinamarink. It is the indie film, in my opinion, of the
Playing
year.
on Shutter, and
Yes,
oh, there she is. There
the
she
Blu-ray.
is.
I tried to find the Walmart Steelbook edition. They didn't have it in my
Oh,
area.
geez. I had
That made me
there
so
was a
upset.
period where the Blu-ray was released where people were messaging me, do you know when they're getting and I'm like, I don't know. You think they're filling me in on this? I don't know,
Yeah,
right?
it's a
So
whole system. I was like, I
yeah,
don't. Yeah, it's a whole.
but playing on in Shutter, Hulu in France on Shadows,
Ooh,
which is like their version of Shutter Shadows.
Shadow. Ooh, that's
Hulu,
cool.
AMC Plus. You can also, I think, just rent it. Yeah,
Absolutely. I mean, it's again the most unique film I've ever seen. As Jason Adams put it, what David Lynch's Poltergeist might have looked like, which I did not know David Lynch was in the running to direct Poltergeist. That's pretty interesting.
I didn't
Uh,
know that either.
that's on
Was
the
he?
at least that's what's on the cover. It's this is what David
No, no,
Lynch's
no, no.
Poltergeist.
He's using a term of art. It's what if he had
Oh,
directed it?
okay.
Yeah.
I thought
Maybe
that was an
he
actual
was.
thing. I
I
don't
don't
know.
know, but
Poltergeist was such an odd production because I heard Toby Hooper like ghost directed it
well,
or
that's
Spielberg or
been a
something.
very contentious thing because I really do believe this was a like yes, Spielberg did have a hand in it, and also
Hmm.
the composer, I think Jerry Goldsmith had worked with Spielberg on so it has that Spielberg joie de vivre. But Toby Hooper, let's give him some credit. He directed that picture.
Absolutely, yes. Poltergeist is such a cool movie. I might need to go rewatch that tonight.
It's
But
really
yeah,
good.
absolutely. But yeah, thank you again for joining me. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. And I mean, hey, maybe we can do this again sometime. You're a great
Yeah.
guest. Love talking with you. And that about does it. Thank you guys for tuning in to Talking Terror. Uh, thank you for watching, and hope you enjoyed. Hello, everyone, and thank you for watching that episode of Talking Terror. I really enjoyed talking to Kyle Edward Ball, director of Skinamarink, writer, director, editor, producer of Skinamarink. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Hope you learned some new insider knowledge. Don't mind the band aid on my face. Just a quick reminder, thank you to Fangoria. I am a Fangoria affiliate, as I mentioned at the beginning, and I just want to let you guys know that you can get 20% off an entire order or a one-time subscription to this awesome magazine. I have my latest issue right here. To get a cool, badass cover like this, you need to be a subscriber. This is like the subscriber edition. So you get really unique covers, really cool stuff. I mean, you can also buy it off the shelf, but like you get these awesome covers if you're a subscriber, man. And delivered to your door, yeah, it's great. Lots of great people over at Fangoria, lots of great articles, and I mean, they're the best of the best. First in Fright since 1979, I believe, and they're just the greatest. I could only say good things about Fangoria. So be sure to use that discount code jacobtheharper, all caps, no space, for 20% off an entire order or a one-time subscription, and that is a pretty good deal for all the content you get out of these. So definitely do that. Be sure to follow all my social medias linked down in the bio. Listen to the episode on Spotify if you're interested. Take it on the road, whatever. And leave a comment on who you think I should interview next. I had a lot of fun interviewing Kyle, and I am totally down to interview other people in the industry. That's what I've been doing on this channel. And speaking of the channel, be sure to subscribe right down below. Well, first hit like if you enjoyed the episode, of course, but also feel free to subscribe for more episodes and more horror content. I do short films. I've done analysis videos on horror. I again do the podcast, so lots of stuff here. You could even see lots of stuff on my social medias, as I mentioned, which will be linked down below if you want to keep up to date on what I've been doing. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you around. Peace out.